Hello. Sorry, y'all, for the delay. Had some more technical issues, but I think we're back up now. Good to see everyone here. Let me go ahead and try to figure out why my light isn't working. Oh, there we go. Nice. Cool. Oopsies. Can you guys hear me okay? Oh, I think my mic's a little quiet. Let me fix that up. All right, hopefully that is better. I'm gonna go ahead and turn on my mouse tracker. We can just go ahead and dive into it today. My slides are here. Oh, good. Thanks for letting me know. If you do want to see the slides, just go ahead and use the exclamation mark slides command. I'm actually going to open that up myself. And I'm going to open this. Let me share my screen. Yeah, I hope everyone's having a great day today. It's pretty cloudy and gloomy today in New York, but you know it's all good. It's wasn't as cold as yesterday, so yeah, Friday tomorrow, so that is exciting. Yeah, this week has gone by pretty fast. Yeah, it seems a storm coming over to the northeast. All right, let me go ahead and switch my stream to the slides. Make sure I'm actually on the right screen. Nice. All right, cool. Let's get right into it. So hopefully everyone had a good session on Tuesday and had some good practice and a basic introduction to React. The goal of today is to really kind of review a lot of the concepts we introduced and kind of glossed over and just go deeper and kind of strengthen our understanding. And then our project today that we're going to build, or at least we're going to get started building, and I'm going to have you guys finish it as homework, is we're going to build our own React weather app. So that's going to put together a lot of the things that we encountered. All right, so the agenda today is a little more stacked than usual, just because I wanted to take some more time to kind of dive into each of these concepts a little bit more in depth. So we're going to review stuff like the component tree concepts really quick, then talk about hooks. Specifically, I want to highlight two particular hooks: use effect and use states. Those are kind of the most common hooks you'll probably be using in React. So just thought I'd highlight those. Then we're going to talk about some, I guess, common application patterns like handling form inputs in React, how to map over state, all that. And then after this is when we're going to do that demo together where we're going to build that weather app. So that should be fun. And then we're going to talk about the homework, Q&A, and also talk a little bit about what to expect going forward since we are entering the holiday season. So just want to make sure everyone's on the same page about that. All right. So just to kick it off really quick, just a really quick recap of components. So not last week, on Tuesday, we talked a lot about components and how you can create them in React. And what your applications will end up looking like most of the time is something like this. This is what we call as a component tree, right? Which is basically your app is just components made up of components. So maybe this top component could be your app, like the app.js file, basically. And then maybe that app is made up of a header component or like some post if you're making like a blog, for example. And then that the header component may be made up of like a link component, a button component, and so forth. So if we think of applications in this way as just like a tree structure, a lot of these React concepts start to make a lot more sense. And also just want to highlight that this way of thinking about applications is not unique to only React. It is the same thing for any kind of component-based framework like Svelte, Vue, Angular 2 plus, or I don't know what to officially refer Angular 2 plus as, but I'm just going to call it Angular 2 plus because, that's what I remember it being called last. Any of those application-based frameworks all operate in a very similar way. So when we see what this actually looks like in an interface, this is kind of more what you would see in your app, right? So if we think of the entire app as just the app component, that's what this little brownish line highlights. And then maybe the app is comprised of like two smaller components. One is like the search bar component in this example. The other is like the contact table. And maybe the contact table is made up of rows, right? Row components, etc. And they're just highlighted in this color, in these colors to make it more visible. Obviously, your app is hopefully just won't look like this, but this just makes it very easy for us to visualize how these components come together in our app. So just wanted to start off with that. Pretty basic, but hopefully this visual representation helps us understand how like we're going to start building more complex apps. Okay, now let's talk about hooks. So hooks are kind of the main takeaway from today, just because there's a lot to say about hooks. I know I kind of glossed over it on Tuesday, and I just wanted to take some time to revisit hooks and really get everyone on the same page. So the exact definition of a hook is it's basically a special kind of JavaScript function. And it's called a hook because it lets us hook into React features from our own components. I actually just learned that today. I always wondered why it was called hooks, but I looked it up, and apparently it's because it lets you hook into React. So that's interesting. And we can use hooks to add extra functionality to our React components without having to write a lot of extra code. And another thing to point out about hooks is that hooks were introduced when functional components in React were introduced, right? You guys remember on Tuesday, I talked a little bit about the differences between class components, which is kind of the old way of writing React, and then functional components, which is like the new way. And hooks came out with functional components. So hooks are still relatively new. If you look at class components, you're not going to find any hooks in there. Hooks only really exist in functional components. So that's just something to call out. And there's really just two kinds of hooks. There are built-in hooks. So these are hooks that come with the React package, like they're built into React. And then there's custom hooks, which are hooks that we can define ourselves or other people have defined for us that we can import into our apps. So let's start by talking about built-in hooks. So there are many built-in hooks, and I just highlighted 3 here. First off, we have use state, which you guys have seen on Tuesday, right? Use state is what lets us use state, right? It basically just adds state to a functional component. We have use effect. I don't think we introduced this one yet, but this is probably the second most popular hook. And use effect is, it lets us run a piece of code after something happens in our app. Kind of vague, and that's vague on purpose because use effect can be used for many, many different events. For example, you can use effect when the page loads. You can use effect when a user clicks something. It's very flexible, but we have a dedicated slide on use effect, so I won't say too much more there because I do want to get back and review it. And then we have use context, which lets us use the React context library, which allows us to share state in between components. We're not going to be really covering context today. That is a little out of the scope. But in the Playground app, there should be a dedicated module on context if you do want to go and revisit that. But we're probably not going to talk about context today just because there's probably not enough time. But anyways, really, I just want you to focus on the use state and use effect built-in hooks, because those two you'll be using pretty much every time you create a React app. Like I can't remember a single time where I've created a React app and I didn't use one of those two hooks. So, all right, let's talk about custom hooks now. So custom hooks, these are basically hooks that you define yourself or a third party has. And basically, all you need to do is create a function that has use in the beginning of the name. So it's like a special naming, essentially. So if you, for example, if you want to allow users to do keyboard shortcuts and make those work in your app, you can maybe define your own hook called use hotkey, for example. Notice the use syntax, right? Put use in front of what the function name, and React knows that that's a hook. And basically, this is going to run a piece of code after a certain hotkey was pressed. You can also install third-party hooks as NPM packages. So same example as the hotkeys. You know, if you don't want to code that yourself, if you rather just use a version that someone else has built, you can just install a package. For example, like someone made this React-use hotkeys package, which, as you can see, it's just a hook that someone defined that you can use in your app. If you very quickly want to just be like, hey, when a user clicks escape or F7, you want to do something. Like other people have defined these hooks for you, so you can just install those. But most of the time I don't end up writing my own hooks unless the app is like fairly complex, just because between use effect and use state and some of the other built-in hooks, they do cover a lot of the use cases. But hotkeys was just one of the most common examples I could think of for using custom hooks. Okay, let's talk about use effect again because I know I said I would revisit that. Um, use effect is honestly probably one of the most complicated and controversial parts of React. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. And it's because of the reason that I said earlier, which is like it's so powerful and so versatile. And usually, when something's super powerful and super versatile in programming, that kind of means it's dangerous in some ways. And well, basically, like the way I think about use effect is it's essentially a way to run a piece of code after something happens. So the most common use of use effect is this first one right here, which is fetching data from an API when the page loads. So after the component loads and mounts, basically, so after the component actually like loads up on the page, typically if you do want to grab some data, you would put that fetch call into the use effect. So that's like a very common use of use effect. Another thing you could do is if you have like I don't know, something like a webhook connector. We haven't talked about webhooks yet, but if you basically want to subscribe to some data, so like maybe there's a source of data that's like pushing data to your app, and you just want to subscribe to it, you can set up that subscription in UseEffect. It's very commonly used to run code when the page first loads, basically, is what I'm trying to communicate from these two examples. And so if we look at this UseEffect call, this is an example of like what it looks like in our code. So it is, the word UseEffect, and then the first argument is takes in a function, and the second argument, it takes in this array. And this array is very tricky. This array is what they call a dependency array. When this array is empty, like it is now, UseEffect will only run once. It'll only run when the component loads. So in the chat, we have similar to the document add event listener DOM content loaded. Yes, it's very similar. You can think of UseEffect with nothing in this dependency array as basically the same thing as that document.add event listener DOM content loaded. It's basically like when the content loads or when the component loads, run some code. So they do very similar things in that regard. But where UseEffect gets tricky is when you add things to this dependency array. We're not going to get into too many examples of this today, but the idea of the dependency array is that every variable you put in the dependency array, anytime one of those variables changes, UseEffect will run again. So that's when it gets kind of tricky because as you might know, sometimes in programming we have like infinite loops, right? And that's one of the common ways for people to get infinite loops in their React apps, right? Putting a variable in the dependency array, for example, that maybe on change, it causes the whole component to re-render. This can be kind of dangerous if used incorrectly. So we'll keep an eye on that because we'll be revisiting that, I think probably not next week, but we'll go through some examples of when this is dangerous. But for now, I just want you to focus on using UseEffect with nothing in a dependency array, because most of the time, the right way to use UseEffect is to do something when the page loads. So let's see, what's a really fast way to demo this? I'm gonna go ahead and set up an application as just really quick. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna add a UseEffect and I'm gonna fetch some weather data. And we're gonna use the same application to actually do the homework, or like we're gonna actually build the demo with this app. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get it set up, and then we're gonna go back to the slides after we show kind of what UseEffect does. So let me go ahead and open my terminal. So we're gonna use create React app to create our weather app. So I'm gonna go into my projects folder, go into my Bootcamp projects, make that a little bigger. I feel like I should memorize this command. I think it's npx create React app. And then I'm going to say, what should I call it? Let's call it React weather something. Makes it easy for me to remember what technologies are creating what apps. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and spin that up. All right, let's give that a second. While that's setting up, I'm gonna go ahead and just move along in the slides just to this one really quick, just to show you what I mean by UseEffect is dangerous when used wrong. It's not really dangerous if you just use it for running code as soon as the page loads, like that is a little safer. But if you look up use effect on Google or YouTube, you're gonna see a lot of like videos and articles like this. So it's just like goodbye use effect or why I don't use effect, and like people basically like saying no, cancel use effect or whatever. I totally get it. It's a controversial issue in the React community, but let's see, what's the best way to say this? The reason why people don't like use effect is because yeah, it's so powerful and so versatile that it's easy to be used wrong. But as we progress, and next week we're going to start talking about Next.js, which is an opinionated framework on top of React. With more opinion, we move away from these dangerous patterns. So I'm not saying you don't have to worry about using use effect in the wrong way. I just want you to be aware that it can be used in the wrong way. But where we're going as a bootcamp is we're going to use more opinionated frameworks that force us to do things the right way, or at least as close to the right way as possible. So that is good, but do keep in mind that if you do see articles saying like don't use effect, you can take those with a grain of salt. Is basically what I'm trying to say. Okay, cool. So our app has set up. I'm gonna go ahead and open it in my editor. Yeah, exactly. Someone in the chat says similar as TypeScript is to JavaScript in that strict nature. That's a really great analogy. Honestly, JavaScript is kind of like the Wild West, right? You can kind of do anything you want in it. It's not that safe as a language, but with TypeScript, it enforces a lot more opinion, which is usually better for like if you're looking for best practice. Cool. So I have my app open. I'm gonna go ahead and open my my Bootcamp version of VS Code. And by Bootcamp version, I just mean my VS Code with no extensions installed. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and open my folder that I just created. Where is it? Nope. Projects, Bootcamp projects, React Weather. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and open my terminal here. So new terminal. Cool. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and get our app running. Just spin that up. And what I'm going to do is, so let's go back to the slide. So I'm going to demo how we can use effect to fetch data, right? Basically, when a user visits our app, we want, as soon as they visit the app, so as soon as they go to the page, local 3000 or whatever, we want to fire an API call. So use effect is what is going to do that for us. So in my app.js, I'm just going to do it in app.js for now. Remember, like this is all the boilerplate code that Create React App ships with. I'm going to go ahead and define a use effect here. So remember, we always want to do these use effects before the return, right? The return is what actually returns all the UI that React creates. So we're going to actually do that above the return. So use effect. And it's gonna, if I press enter, it's gonna auto import it for us. So it imports use effect from React, cool. And remember, the first part of use effect is a function, and the second part of use effect is an array. So let's check out the slide. Yeah, right here, right? The first argument, this section right here. Actually, let me turn on my mouse pose. I just realized that's not really working. There we go. So the first part of use effect is a function. The second part is an array. So let's define that here on the right. So use effect, parentheses, and then I'm going to put the function. So parentheses, arrow function, brackets, and then I'm going to do comma, and then an array. So I'm going to save this. It's going to lint that for us. But basically inside here, will run when the page loads. So whatever we put in here will run when the page loads. So to demonstrate, I'm just going to start by putting a console log. Hello. Save that. And if we go to our app and open the console, oops, you can see that the hello message runs. So if I refresh the page, it just runs hello. So to demonstrate what an API call is going to look like here, so let's say we want to, when the user visits the page, we just want to grab some weather data. So first we're going to go to the Open Medio API, I believe is what it's called. Yeah, Open Medio. So this is going to be the same API you guys are going to use for your homework. This is a free open source weather API, which is what I like. So I'm going to go ahead and just, let's see, I'm just going to grab this URL. Oopsies. Yeah, I think I can just grab this whole URL, and basically this URL is going to give me this data. So I don't even know what latitude, longitude this is. I don't know what location this is. This is just an example. So let's say we want to grab this weather data when the page loads. So I'm going to copy that URL. Maybe we save that URL as a string because it is quite long. So I'm going to say const weather URL equals, I'm going to paste that. That's our weather URL. And then I'm going to delete our console log, and I'm going to go ahead and write our fetch call. So we're going to say fetch, parentheses, and remember fetch basically makes a request to a URL, and it's going to return that data or give back that data. So fetch, and then here we can say weather URL, and fetch returns a promise. And I know we haven't talked about promises yet. That is coming up in the Node.js section. But basically, we can do stuff with what fetch gives us with a .then. So basically, it makes sure that the weather API data comes back successfully first, and then whatever code we have in the .then is going to run. So .then, and then we can maybe say like data, or actually we could say response first. And we got to return that response into JSON, which is going to look like this, I think. Something like that. And then we're going to do one more .then after we have the JSON data. And then once we get this weather data back, I'm just going to console log it. So console log data, something like that. I'll just do it like this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and refresh our page. And as you can see, we get the weather data. It's kind of hard to see at this point, but basically it's giving back this huge object, and our dev tools is like shrinking it for us. But this is basically like, this is a very common use case of use effect essentially. Like if you want to run fetch data as soon as the page loads, then you would put a fetch call in the use effect. So that's a basic demo of how that works. And we're going to be revisiting use effect in a second when we do the full demo. All right, let me go back to the slides. Okay, so that's use effect. Let's talk about use state. So changing gears a little bit. So in this example right here, we're using use state to add a piece of state called count to our component. So if you guys were at the session on Tuesday, this should look kind of familiar because we did something that basically the same thing. We made like a counter app. And the count state was initialized to 0. And we're also defining a function with use state called setCount that can be used to update the count state. So you guys remember in Svelte how the count variable like was just by itself, and when we needed to update it, we could just say count equals whatever to update it. React says don't do that. React does not let you update the state by just saying, like, for example, count equals 2. You cannot update the state like that. You have to update the state using the second argument, or not second argument, the second item in the array that use state gives you. So it's very confusing. It is weird to get used to, but this is basically what all of your state like initiations will look like. So you say use state, what you want the count to start out as, and then you're going to get back an array of the state variable and then a function that updates the state. So how we're going to use this is in our component, we can then use the count state and then the setCount function to keep track of a value and update it over time. So for example, let's say we are creating our counter app again. We could basically use setCount to increase the count by 1 every time a user clicks the button. So here in this example, this is what that looks like. Here we have a button, and we have an onClick handler on the button. And then on the onClick handler, we're passing in a function. And inside the function, we're calling setCount. And we're taking the current value of count, adding 1 to it, and setting that as the new count. So every time you click it, it's just going to keep updating the count. So this is the right way to create and update state, basically. So now we're going to move on to something a little bit more real world. One of the most common ways you're going to be using use state is for user inputs. So this is something also that Svelte had as well, right? You guys remember how when we were doing our to-do list in Svelte, I don't know if you guys remember this exactly, but in the input field where the user could type in their input, we had to bind that to a state variable. You guys remember we had like a to-do input variable that we had to bind that input element too. In React, we basically have to do the same thing, except it's a little bit more verbose. So whenever you have any kind of input element, so like a text field or a select dropdown or a checkbox or whatever, whenever you have any kind of input like that, you basically need a state variable that matches it. So in this case, in this example, we have a form with just one input, right? That just takes in some user text. And because we have one input, we're going to create one use state. So check this out. So we have first, we use use state to start out as an empty string, and then we call this use state input value, or we're calling the state variable input value, and it gives us also a function called set input value. So that's part one. Second part is we have to define some kind of function that's going to update input value. So basically, whenever a user types or hits any kind of button into the input, so every time they click a key to add a new text, new letter to the input, we have to call this handle change function. And in this handle change, it's going to take an event, because this handle change is going to be on change. On change is a built-in method on inputs in React, and on change receives an event. And I don't know if you guys remember back from regular HTML CSS, but event.target.value will give us the current value of whatever's in that input. And so React basically says, okay, whatever the user has typed in this input, set it to be the input value. This might seem like you're doing the exact same thing with extra steps, but this is basically the safe way to update input fields in React. You basically have to hijack the event.target.value and set that to the input value every time the user hits a key. So, compared to Svelte, this may seem kind of stupid, right? Because Svelte was like, all you need to do is just say bind value, and in the value you wanted to bind, right? It was very straightforward. Now we have to do something, a little extra steps. We have to create this function. This function is what's responsible for binding the input text to our state variable. And so how we put it all together is in our input element, you see we have a value, right? And then we set that equal to the input value. And then we have our on change that is set equal to the handle change function that we created. So we'll be doing this in the demo as well, so I can show you how it all wires up. But this is a pretty important pattern to remember, because this is probably the most common way you'll be using use state. Okay, so that's one of the most common ways we'll be using state. The second most common way we'll be using state is by mapping over it. So mapping over state in React is basically, it lets you loop through a list of values in the state and generates a new list of elements based on those values. So if we imagine for a second, like the TikTok feed, right? The TikTok feed is a list of videos. Each of those videos is probably represented by an object, right? Maybe the object has keys like the username, the link to the MP4 of the video, maybe like how many comments, all this stuff, right? And TikTok basically can take that list and map over it to transform each of those objects into one of those videos that we see. So it's commonly used whenever you want to display some kind of list of items. So in the chat it says so it's similar to by setting the default value and then appending the value the user every time the user inputs. Yeah, essentially that's actually a really good way to think about it. It's like you kind of set the initial input here with this line right here, like use state set as empty value, and then this function is basically like every time the input changes, update the value with whatever the user's changed. So that's a good way of thinking about it. So let's take a look at like what mapping over state looks like in practice. So in this example, we have a fake component called my component, and essentially we create a list of objects. So we have a state variable called items, and then a function called set items. And we have use state, and we're setting use state to be equal to an array of 3 items, right? So ID1, item 1, ID2, item 2, and ID3 with the name item 3. And so let's say we want to take this list of this state list and transform it into components. So here we are basically creating a mini component where it essentially is equal to the state variable .map. And you guys remember, map is a JavaScript function that takes a list and transforms it into something else. So in this case, we're taking the list of data here, right? And we're transforming it, so we're mapping it into these divs. So it's going to be a list of divs. And inside the div, we're just showing the name of the item. So this is essentially its own component. This is basically a list of component, right? Item.components is technically a list, right? Because we're just taking this list and transforming it into a list of elements instead of objects. And if we want to render that in our actual component, we can just take this variable, put this in brackets like this, and React will render our list of items. So kind of hard to demonstrate just from this like static screenshot of code, but I'll show you what that looks like in practice, since we're going to be having to do this for our demo. Okay, cool. So hopefully that answered some questions as to like use state, use effect, and some of the stuff we glossed over. Now we're going to put it into practice, put it all together, and we're going to build a weather app. So like always, I always like to start with a visual of what we're going to be building. So this was the mock-up that we had last time. I'm just going to save some time and kind of use something similar. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to change this up. So we're going to build a weather app, and this weather app is going to be it's going to be a weather app where basically a user can enter like a location or something. So maybe we have an input field, right, where they can enter location. So let's pretend this is like a user location. So let's say they type in this. And then maybe we have like a button that submits it or something. Oopsies. There you go. Let's give this a color. Submit. Okay, so basically this input box, they click submit. And when they click submit, basically we want to create a list item here that maybe has the name of the city and then like the current weather or something. That's not the weather. Right now it's like, I don't know. I'm gonna guess like right now is like 40 degrees. I don't know how to quickly get the degree symbol, so I'm just gonna use asterisk and pretend that's the degree symbol. But you guys know what I mean. So something like this, where it's like, you know, every time they type in something and they click submit, it adds a new weather item to the list. So it grabs the location, it grabs the weather from the Open Meteor API that we were looking at earlier, and just adds it here. So if someone types in something else, like they type in Istanbul or something, Istanbul, they click submit, it should add another item here called Istanbul with Istanbul's weather. So very simple, right? It's kind of reminds me a little bit of the Apple iOS weather app in some ways, but obviously looks a little different. So this is what we're going to build today. I'm trying to decide if I should add Tailwind. I guess I might as well. It will speed things up, I think, on the styling, just because I am a little slow with regular CSS these days because I'm so used to Tailwind. So here's our plan. Let's also break this up in components. Let's like highlight what we're gonna do. So this is like a weather list item or something. This is like the weather list item component. And then here we have our, this whole thing is like our weather form component. Maybe we'll call it weather form. So yeah, and then we have like another wrapper around the list items called like weather list or something. So we'll highlight that. Let me duplicate this. I'm gonna do like an example of London. I don't know what the weather is in London. I'm just gonna guess 50 degrees. That's probably not true. So each of these is a weather list item, and then we have weather list as the whole thing. So let's draw another box around the weather list. There we go. And then, okay. There we go. Hopefully this diagram makes somewhat sense, but this is how we're going to think about our components. Cool. So this is basically a to-do list app, but with an extra step, right? Instead of just taking the to-do and adding it to the list, we're going to take the to-do, and when they click submit, we need to fetch the data from the Open Weather API, and then use that data to add a new list item. So we'll see if we can finish this in time span. let's go ahead and, so I'm back in my code. I'm gonna move my browser to the left, and I'm gonna go ahead and set up Tailwind. So I'm gonna go to the Tailwind documentation, go to docs. There should be a quick guide for create React app. Yep, right here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and install all this stuff. You don't have to do this part. This styling part's optional. This is just, makes it a little faster for me. So I'm just gonna copy through these. This should all be somewhat similar if we were on the session on Tuesday. I copy all this code, paste all this. I'm just skimming through this just because we've done Tailwind setup before, but do let me know if you want me to slow down. So I'm gonna add the Tailwind directives into the index.css file. So get rid of that. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa, whoa. Wait, what? Interesting. When I copy this, it's only giving me the last 2 lines, not all 3. Wait, what? Okay, I guess something was just bugged with my editor. Never mind. Cool, and I think that's it. Now we have Tailwind set up, so I should be able to run that and it'll work. Let's get rid of all the stuff that the boilerplate gave us. So I'm gonna delete their CSS. I'm gonna delete all of their code here. I'm just gonna say hi. And save this. Okay, gonna delete this logo as well. Okay, so now we're basically starting fresh with a Tailwind equipped React app. So, take off my headphones. They're hurting my glasses. Oops, I forgot to remove this import. Silly me. Cool. All right, so there we go. There's our hi text. Very hard to see, but we're not going to be here for long. So first things first, I like to start by just creating the UI of the page. So let's just create the UI with some dummy data, and then we're going to get it to work. So first up, we need the weather form component, and then we need to create the weather list component. So let's go ahead and just start by creating a folder for our components. So I'm going to create a folder in source called components. I'm going to go ahead and create a weather form.js. I'm going to leave that blank. I'm going to create another file called weather list. Oopsies, weather list.js. Leave that blank. And in the weather form, I'm going to go ahead and create a new component. So let's see. I'm just going to create a function, weather form. It's good practice to have your component names match the file exactly, and they should all be capital case. Technically, it's not called capital case. I apparently made that up. It's actually called Pascal case, but I just call it capital case, even though that's not the actual term. Cool. So there we go. We have our empty component. I'm going to go ahead and return. So our weather form is going to have a input and then a submit. So let's go ahead and create a form HTML element. And in the form HTML, I'm going to add an input tag with the text type. And then just leave that blank for now. Maybe we add a placeholder text that says like enter a location. And then I'm going to put a button with the type submit. And we're going to say as the text, like, I don't know, like search weather or something. Or get weather, I don't know. Okay. We'll just leave that. We don't have to style that for now. Let's see. Yeah, okay, we'll leave that for now. We won't style it yet. Let's go to weather list. So we're in weather list now. I'm going to create a function. Oh, wait, I actually forgot. In weather form, I forgot to export the component. So I have to export default weather form. If we don't export it, then we're not going to be able to use this file anywhere else. So we got to do that. All right, let's go to weather list. I'll create a function, weather list, return, and we're gonna leave this blank for now. Actually, what we're going to do is we know our weather list needs to take in a list of these like objects and transform them into these weather list items. So maybe what we can do is actually define some props. So let's define some props called, I don't know, like items. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a div. And let's do the same thing that we did in the example of the slides here. So I'm going to go back to the slides. You see this in the slides, we created this variable that mapped over the items. We're going to do the same thing here in our weather list. So I'm going to say const weather items equals items.map. And we don't know what items looks like yet, or at least I don't know. And this is how TypeScript could help, because TypeScript will force us to know. So I'm actually not going to, well, let's pretend weather list looks something like this. Let's pretend items, let's say items looks like an array of objects, and each object has an ID and a location, which is this text right here. Let's pretend this is the location, and let's pretend this is the weather, or maybe no, weather is not a good term. Temperature. Let's just say this is the temperature. So location, being like New York City. Temperature 40. Maybe instead of temperature, we say Fahrenheit or something, just to keep it a little bit more consistent. But you know what? I cannot spell Fahrenheit off the top of my head. So, you know what? I probably could have. Actually, no, there's no way. I definitely would have spelled it wrong. I'm just going to say Fahrenheit is equal to, and we probably don't want this to be a string, right? We probably want this to be a number. Something like this, maybe like 40.2. So items is going to look like an array of these objects, essentially. Let's pretend that. And what we're going to do is in items, in the map, we're going to, for each item, so for each object in this array, we want to render a div. And one thing to note is that when you're rendering a list of items in React, React will complain if you do not add a key property. Because key property, you need to put it on every item that gets rendered in the list. React will complain if you don't do this. Why will it complain? Well, it's just the easiest way to say is if you have many different lists going on and they all have different, like they all have the same keys, sometimes React will like screw up the rendering. So that's why it's good to have like an ID associated with each key. But basically, the main reason to do this is just to not make the React compiler angry. All right, so inside the weather items, basically we have, whenever I see UI that looks like this, so we have like something on the left, like the far left, and then we have something on the far right, I like to use I like to use flexbox, and then I like to use justify between, because justify between will basically space out the items automatically so that they're always on opposite sides, which is nice. So I'm going to do that here. So I'm going to add a class. Remember, it's a class name because we're using React. Let's give it a border because we have a border here. Let's make it rounded. So I'm going to say rounded LG for like large rounding, like a lot of rounding. You can actually hover over. I think you might need the Tailwind extension for this, but you can hover over each class if you want to see like what the actual CSS rule is. So that's pretty useful. Okay, so we're also going to add flex, like flexbox, and then I'm going to add justify between. Okay, so justify between, that means the two items or the two items we put inside here will be spaced equally apart. So let's create one, maybe like I don't know, let's just say a div for now. I know right now it's only just text, so I could probably get away with using like a p tag, but I'm just doing a div just in case we add like more stuff under here, like more metadata. Just kind of future proofs that a little better. And then here inside the first div, I'm going to put the item dot location, right? Remember the location is in our fake data here. So item dot location. And then the second div, I'm going to put the Fahrenheit weather. So I'm going to say item dot Fahrenheit. And then we probably want to put a degree symbol at the end. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy what the degree symbol is. There we go. There's degree symbol.net. That's pretty interesting. All right, I'm just going to paste that here. So it's just the Fahrenheit degrees and then the symbol. Maybe like a F. There we go. And let's see, what other things to do? I guess I got to make this text really big because in our designs, this text is a lot bigger. So I'm going to say like text 2XL or something. Not important. Okay, something like this. So we've created our mapped list, right? So this is going to take our list of data that we're getting in as props. remember, we haven't actually passed in these props yet. We're just preparing for when we do set up these props. But when we get those props, we're gonna map over it, create a list of weather items, and then we're gonna render our weather items in our component. Cool. All right, so we saved that. I once again almost forgot to export it, so I gotta export default weather list. Oh, also one thing to note is that another way of writing this export default is you can just do it when you define a function. So you can actually do this here as well, just to save some space. It's really the same. All right, so let's save that. So now it's time to kind of put everything together. I think also in the, let's see, what else? In the weather form, let's make our components have no data. So we're not actually going to put state in these data in these components. We're actually only going to accept props. So let's do, for weather form, let's accept the, I think I'm skipping too far ahead. Let's render it all in our app first, and then we'll pass the props. Okay. So this is our leftover code from earlier when we fetched our weather data. So I'm actually just gonna delete that because we don't need to load it when the page loads. We're only gonna load weather data when the user clicks submit. So in our app, I'm gonna go ahead and give this a full screen height. So I'm gonna give it a full screen height, give it a full screen width. I'm gonna give it flex, and I'm gonna justify everything in the center, in the middle of the page. So I'm gonna vertically and horizontally align it. And a really quick way to do that is with flexbox. So you use flexbox, justify center, and items center. So this should horizontally and vertically align the thingy, I hope. So we'll try that. And then in here, this is where we're gonna put a div that will contain our weather form and weather list. So let's pass in our weather form. And then we're gonna put it on our weather list. And weather list remember, we need to pass in data, right? We need to pass in our items array. So we do need to do that. But let's just go ahead and save this and see what it looks like. It probably is not gonna look like anything. Oops, I forgot to import weather list. So it is angry at me. It says weather list is not defined. Import weather list from .components / weather list. All right, save that. Okay, so now it's saying cannot read properties undefined of map. So we know that that's fine because basically it's saying, hey, you haven't passed in any items yet. So that makes sense. Let's just pass in this fake data that we created for now. So I'm gonna copy this, and in app I'm gonna say items, right, because that's the name of the props we defined, is equal to this array. So this is fake data, right? This is just fake data. Okay, so this is what our app looks like. Pretty not great. It's all mushed together, but we are vertically and horizontally centered. You know what? Let's not worry too much about the styling. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some like padding on the form to make it look a little nicer. So I'm going to add some padding from the bottom, and padding from the bottom is going to make put a gap in between our list right here and then the form. Maybe to add a padding bottom of like 16 or something. All right, that's fine. Probably should give our input like a border and stuff. I'm gonna add some padding onto the input, so maybe like px2, py3. Actually, no, let's do px3, py2, and then border. Maybe also round this, something like that. And let's also just add some quick styling to our button as well. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a dark background, so background gray 900. Give it some white text. I'm also going to give it the same amount of padding I gave the input, keep it all consistent. All right, almost there. I do want to make it rounded because now it looks kind of weird, right, when you're using a mix of rounded and not rounded components. So that's a little design tip there. All right, almost there. I do want to put some spacing in between these two. There's many ways to do that. Like you can put a margin right on the input. You can put a margin left on the button, or you can just make the form flex and then add a gap, which will automatically space everything in the form with that gap. So let's add a flex, gap, x4. So this will put spacing of 16 pixels for every item inside the form. So all of these items, each of these items will be spaced apart by 16 pixels. So cool, that looks a little better. It's not beautiful yet. That's whatever. Let's just get it working first, and then we'll come back and make it look prettier. Okay. So basically when we type in a location here, so New York's, or I already have New York in the list, so if I type in Istanbul, I did it again, I type in Istanbul, and you click get weather. When you click get weather, I want to make an API request to the Open Weather API, get back the weather, and then pass it into the weather list. So that's essentially what we're trying to accomplish. So in app.js, remember, whenever we're dealing with inputs, we got to create a state variable that lines up with that input. So I'm going to create a state variable. So const, we're going to just call this location input. You can also say user input, doesn't really matter. Set location input equals use state. So I'm going to click enter so I can auto import it from React. So now it's imported, cool. And I'm just going to start with the empty string. Okay. And then let's also, we need to do like a handle change function, which will, every time the user types something, we need to update it, right? Remember, there's no auto bind like there's in Svelte, unfortunately. We have to kind of define that ourselves. So I'm going to define a function called handle change. So this function is going to get called every time the input changes or every time the user types. Remember, handle change, let's go back to our slides to reference. Handle change is going to take in an event right here. And then we're going to say set location input on event.target.value. So I'm going to put an event in the parentheses, and I'm going to say set location input event.target.value. All right. So we're going to pass handle change, and then we're going to pass location input into weather form. So let's do that. So in weather form, let's go ahead and accept those as props. So to create props, put an object in the parentheses of the component, and we're going to say first location input, and then handle change, excuse me, and then we're going to set the value of the input to be location input like this. So same as this example, right? We're putting the value in here, and then on the on change, we're going to say handle change. Okay, and then we need to do something when this button gets clicked. So we're gonna have to pass in another prop that will be a function, and this function will run when the form gets submitted. And remember, forms get submitted when you have a button with the type submit, or if you're in a form and you press enters. So submit handles both of those cases, which is nice. Cool, so we have those defined. Let's go ahead and pass those in first. So location input is equal to location input, and then handle change is equal to handle change. Like that. All right. Save this. Save this. Okay, cool. So far, so good. Let's test if this works. We'll know it works if I could just type into the input. Nothing else should happen, right? If we can't type, that means our handle change isn't working. Okay, so I'm typing and it works. Cool. But let me just show you what happens if I don't pass in a handle change. Let's say like I just comment this line out. So basically handle change is a function that does nothing. Let's just save this, and I'll show you what I mean about you need this function. Like if we don't have this function and you type, look at that. I'm typing, but nothing's happening. Weird, right? That you have to have this update input, basically. Otherwise, if you don't have the update input, React is just not going to update the state, essentially. Kind of a pain, but you know that's what you just got to do if you're going to go the React way. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. 1 second. There we go. Okay, so we are accepting inputs now. Now we have to do something when I click get weather or I press enter. So let's create another function here. And we're going to call this maybe handle submit, right? Function handle submit. And guys, remember on submit, there's also an event object here, and we have to prevent default. You guys heard me rant about prevent default before, but basically the short version of it is if we don't prevent default, on a form submit, the whole page is going to refresh, which we don't want. So we have to always run prevent default on any kind of submit. Sorry I missed out on today's stream. We'll catch up tonight. Yeah, no worries. Today I will be uploading both of the videos. The first video I needed to do some editing, so that's why it's taking a little longer, but they should both be up by tonight. So sorry about that. All right, cool. So in our handle submit, for now, all we're going to do is let's just console.log our input, just to make sure it's all working, right? We don't want to do it all in one go. We want to break it up. So handle submit, and now we have to pass in our handle submit into the form. So let's go ahead and define a new prop here. I'm going to new line, handle submit. And then to fire handle submit, we can just put that on the form. On the form, there's a built-in function called onSubmit, and here we can just pass in handle submit like this. Okay, so far so good. Let's go ahead and test it. So if I type in something and I press get weather or I press enter on my keyboard, we should see a console log because it's going to fire handle. Wait, actually I lied. We didn't even pass in the function yet. So actually I'm glad I didn't test it because it wasn't going to work. There we go. We have to pass it in. There we go. Cool. So now it's actually being passed in. So now if I type something and I click get weather, we can see that it's console logged something in the console. So that's working. Okay. Now instead of the console log, we have to replace this with our fetch call, right? We basically have to fetch to the Open Media API and get back weather data. So let's check out the Open Media API again. 1 second. I'm gonna grab some water. Okay. Yeah. So let's see how this API works. It looks like right now, before we were passing it a longitude and latitude, we don't really have that. Let's see if there's a way for us to just pass in a location or just text. Select city. URL builder, maybe that could help. New York. Do we have to pass in a... Darn. It says longitude and latitude is required. See that? Latitude and longitude is required. So I don't know if our app can work just from passing in text. Like we'll have to basically pass in a city or some location that gets transformed into latitude and longitude, and that should work. That's okay. All right, we'll do some kind of workaround. Or you know what? Let's see if there are any other APIs that we can use. There are lots out there, so I'm not too bothered about it. Free weather API. But all of these make us sign up, and then we have to have an API key, and it's like kind of a pain. All right, forget it. We're just gonna go with this. Yeah, you know what? We might have to require the user to pass in their latitude and longitude manually. Kind of sucks, but there's got to be one where we can just pass in like the location, right? That we don't have to sign up for. Yeah, we could do another API that takes the location, transforms that to latitude, longitude, and then look it up, but that is kind of a pain. Yeah, these all require signing up. You know what? Well, whatever. We'll make it work. We're just gonna do a janky version with the latitude and longitude. So change of plans. Our app can no longer just take the location. Unfortunately, it has to take in a latitude and a longitude. So we're gonna modify our structure a little bit. Latitude, longitude. something like this. So we're gonna have two input forms essentially, and we have to then take this latitude, longitude, and then send that in. So sorry, slight change, but unfortunately we're gonna have to make sacrifices to use these free and open source APIs. What about making a map where the key is the Latin long and then the city's value? Yeah, we could do that also. It just, we kind of have to hard code like a lot of latitudes and longitudes. That could be a second iteration, but just for now, just to save time, I'm just gonna go the latitude longitude approach. You can definitely like have this work in the original way we had it, but I just want to be considerate of people's time, so I'm just gonna do it with just latitude and longitude. Cool. So to do this change, I basically need to make some changes to my state as well, right? Now that I have two input fields, I need a latitude input and a longitude input. So let's go ahead and change this location input to be lat input and set lat input. And then long input, set long input. These should probably be numbers rather than strings. Yeah, let's make these numbers to be safe. Actually, we can go either way, right? Like a number would be safer because then it forces users to only type in numbers, which, Latin longs can only really be numbers. But just, we could also have it work as a string as well. This is not really best practice, but it works for now. So we have lat input, long input. And what we're going to do is we're going to swap out this location input. We're going to do lat input equals lat input, long input equals long input. And let's go into our weather form and make those changes. So we're going to change this location input to lat input and long input, like that. And then now we have two inputs. So let's add another input field here. Yep, that's fine. Enter a latitude. Or just, this is too much text to show. I'm just going to say latitude and longitude. Longitude. And then we're going to go ahead and replace this value with long input handle change. Oh, now we have to have two different handle changes, right? We need like one handle lat change and one handle long change. So we're going to have to change that as well. So this is going to be lat input and handle lat change. And this is going to be long input and handle long change. So it's getting a little more complex, but that's okay. Okay, so we need to pass in those other functions. Let's change this to be handle lat change. And then we're going to change this to set lat input. Oops, spelled that wrong. And then we're going to create a function called handle long change. Set long change. Event.target.value. Okay, this works for now. Not ideal, but we'll live. I just want to show you guys how the mapping and the fetching and all that works together. So even though this is not the greatest user experience for users, hopefully it will suffice. So long change. All right. Cool. Let's save that. Oops, I spelled something wrong. I said handle long change. That's not what I want. It's wait, it is long change. Handle long change. Did I not? Probably spelled something wrong. Handle long change. There we go. Handle long change. And then in our weather form, handle long change, set long change. Oh, whoops. This is not matched up. This should be set long input right here. That's what I messed up. Okay, cool. So now we have our latitude input, our longitude input. Not perfect, but whatever. And instead of just showing New York City, this is probably going to show the Latin long instead. So we're going to have to make a couple of adjustments, but that's okay. So basically, now we're going to do our handle submit. So we essentially need to take the latitude and longitude, add it to, let me go back to the home page. So So see how here in this URL, there's like a latitude equals whatever, and then a longitude equals whatever. We're gonna have to swap out these values with our own. So what we could do is maybe we can just copy this URL. So someone in the chat said it could have just been handle change and this just pass param lat and long, and based on that update diff things. Yeah, definitely. That's probably a much better way to do it, because here I've kind of like unnecessarily added another function. You could just, yeah, I agree. Like putting one handle change and then having another parameter here, like being, I don't know, like state variable or something, and then based on whatever state variable is, like if it's lat, then update lat. If it's long, update long. That's totally valid as well. There's many ways to do that here. So that's actually probably a better approach, honestly. Cool. So we're gonna take this URL. So I'm gonna copy that. I'm going to paste it here. Const weather URL. Let me get rid of our old. Actually, I just have it here. I'm just gonna grab it from our code from earlier. So let me go ahead and close this Explorer. There we go. Okay, so we have this big string. I probably don't need the humidity or wind speed or all that, so I'm just gonna delete that. And I can just turn this into a template string. So I'm gonna replace these double quotation marks with these backticks. And with these backticks, it's gonna let me add variables into the string. So I'm gonna delete this I'm gonna delete this latitude equals 52.52. I'm gonna replace this 52.52 with our lat input variable. And I'm gonna delete this longitude and do the same thing. So longitude equals 13.41 in their example. I'm gonna replace it with our own longitude, so long input. And I'm just gonna leave this all the same. Okay, so now this is our weather URL with the inputs. So someone in the chat asked her, what keyboard is that? That's ASMR right there. Thank you. I'm using what is it called? I'm using a Mojo 68 with silver switches. Thank you. The switch, it's silver switches for, I think Gatoron is silver switches. They're definitely my favorite. They sound really nice. But appreciate that. All right, so we got our weather API, our URL now. Let's go ahead and finish this up. So I'm gonna call fetch on our weather URL. And basically, we're gonna do that chain of .thens again, right? And after the .thens, we basically wanna take our data and save it to our state. Or like we need a list of weather items, right? Remember this fake list that we made here? Basically, when we get back our data, we want to create a new object and add it to this list. So let's go ahead and set up that state first. So const, I'm just gonna say items. I don't have a good name for this. I should probably just call it like weather items or something. Weather items. Set weather items equals use state. And I'm just gonna set it to an empty array for now. It's just an empty list. Okay. So let's go ahead and make our fetch call. And then I'm gonna do a .then. We get a response back, and always well, not always, but like most of the time you do response.json first. This will transform the messy response object into a JSON format. So it will look like this, easier to parse and all that. And then we're gonna do another .then, and we take the data that comes from the JSON, and then we're going to let's say we're just gonna console log it for now, just to see what that looks like. Okay. So a lot going on here. So basically, I need to type in a latitude and longitude, click submit, and then we should see a console log with the weather data that comes back. So this is gonna be kind of hacky because I don't know latitudes and longitudes off the top of my head. So let's go ahead and just grab some from their service. Let's select city. Let's say like London. Oops. London, England. It says London's latitude is 51.51 and their longitude is negative 0.13, I guess. So in our app, we're going to paste the latitude as 51.51. In the longitude, I'm going to paste negative 0.13. And then if I click get weather, we should see some console log. So let's see what happens. Oh, that's pretty fast. So we got our data back. Current weather, temperature 1.3. Is this in Fahrenheit or Celsius. It's probably in Celsius, right? I don't know. Are all of these in Celsius? Settings. Okay, never mind. I guess by default they always return the weather in Celsius. So our weather is going to be in Celsius. But basically we're going to take the current weather key from the object that comes back, grab the temperature, and we're going to save all that to a new object. Let's see, what else do we get? Yeah, nothing else important. I think we basically just want the current weather key. Okay, so now that we've seen what our data looks like, this is where I'm gonna put a comment. We're gonna add a time switch to metric system. Yeah, no doubt. Like I don't know why America hasn't switched over, but you know that's the American way. All right, so basically we want to add a new item to weather items with the latitude and longitude, longitude. Oops, I just can't spell today. Longitude and temperature. Okay, so let's do that. So maybe we create a const new item equals object, and we're gonna put a lat. So lat equals lat input. Long equals long input. And then maybe we say just Celsius. Oh, Celsius. I don't like the name Celsius. Let's just use temperature. But it's implied that this is Celsius temperature. So temperature is going to be data, right? Because data is this whole object. Data dot current weather dot temperature, right? We have to do 2 dots here because we have to go into the current weather object and then one more to grab the temperature. Excuse me. So this is going to be data dot current weather, right? The naming has to match up exactly. If it's off by 1 letter, it's going to be wrong. Dot temperature. Okay, cool. So we got a new item. Now we're going to add this new item to our list. And so one thing we could do is, like, what if we did something like this? What if we did set weather items a new array, and then we put new item in here. So this is a valid way of doing this, but what this means is that our list is only ever going to have 1 item, right? Every time we add a new item to the list, this syntax is going to overwrite our old list with the new list. So that's probably not what we want. If we just want to add new items to the list, we can use array destructuring to basically create a kind of a copy of our old list and add the new list item after it. So let's say we want to do that. So we can do ... weather list. So this is our weather items, not weather list. Weather items ... weather items, and then the new item. So this will basically not overwrite our this will not overwrite our array every time. This will just take our existing array, add the new item at the end, and you know that's more in line with what we want. We don't want to overwrite it every time. All right, so let's save that. We have to make some changes though, because remember we changed how our weather items list looks like. It no longer has this location. We now have a lat and long. So let's go into weather list and make that adjustment first. So I'm going to delete this. We don't need that anymore. So instead, we're going to first say item.lat, item.long. How do people represent lat long? I think with commas, right? Like lat, comma, long. I don't know. It's been a while since I studied this stuff, but we're just going to show like the lat here and then the comma longitude. And then instead of item.Fahrenheit, now we've changed it to item.temperature. And instead of F, it's C. So we'll make it look like that. Save that. Cool. Everything else should be the same. Oh, we don't have an ID though. That's okay. Maybe... we don't have an ID right now. Instead of the ID, this is not best practice, but this will do when you're not dealing with like database items, because really only when you have like database items do you have like IDs. It's kind of weird to like create your own ID for things. So instead of the ID, we're just going to use the index of the list. Once again, this is not recommended. This is what most React tutorials say you should do, but to be honest, this is not best practice. But I think it's fine if we're not dealing with database items. So take that. So for this current exercise, it's fine. But for later, I would not set the key to be equal to the index. Okay, So save this, and then save this. Let's make sure this all works. Let's go back to our app. And oh yeah, so we want to delete this fake data with items, and we want to replace this with our weather items state variable. Save that. Okay, cool. That was a lot of work, but now for the moment of truth. So when we type in a latitude and longitude in here, and I click get weather, it should make this fetch call, get our data back, create a new item, add the item to the list, and then as soon as the weather items list is updated, the weather list component should immediately map over it and create a new item. So that's a lot, but let's go ahead and see if this works. So I click get weather. Yay! So we now have our latitude and longitude and what the weather is. It'd be a lot nicer if we could have the location name and all that, but this will do for now. Let's do some styling to make this a little nicer looking. Maybe we'll give this a like font bold. Let's make this like bold, and let's also give this some padding as well. So I'm gonna add px3, py2. There we go. Make it a little nicer. Let's go ahead and we probably also want to erase these inputs after I click get weather, right? That's kind of inconvenient to have to force the user to do that. So let's go ahead and go into here. After the handle submit is done, maybe this is where we can, after the fetch, maybe this is where we can set lat input to be empty string. So this is how we reset it. Set long input to be empty string. There we go. And let's go ahead and test it on another location. So I'm gonna go back into the weather API, grab like, I don't know, Norway or something. Oops, that's not how you spell Norway. Norway, grab the latitude and longitude. So 62 and 10. So I'm gonna say 62, 10. I'm gonna click get weather, and we get the weather under there. So pretty cold, but now our weather app is working. So Jackie Fu says, did you try the geocoordinates API? Yeah, I probably should have done that, honestly, as the first example, instead of just having people manually type it. So that's a good suggestion. Maybe for the homework, you guys can implement that API that Jackie just added. Maybe like add a button like next to get weather, like get current location. So I don't have to manually figure out my own latitude and longitude to get the weather. So lots of improvements we can make here, but just given our time constraints, hopefully this all started to make sense a little better. Basically, to do a really quick review, we went over a lot of state stuff. So we showed how to use state to keep track of like text inputs, right? It's very important, kind of confusing, honestly, especially if you're coming from a Svelte. Svelte kind of spoils us with the binding. So you just have to get into the habit of, creating some kind of function to update the input. We also figured out how to create a state variable of like an array of items. And then we also kind of discussed how we use fetch as part of after a user event, right? After a user clicks get weather or submits this form, we call the fetch function on the URL and we get our data. And then when we get our data, that's when we update our state. So, it's a little bit more complex than the example we did on Tuesday, but hopefully it's all starting to come together a little more. And hopefully React is starting to become a little bit more comfortable. I know it's going to take a while just because React is not easy, guys. Like, I want to remind you guys that React is actually quite, I would say, advanced, honestly, for web development. But I think as long as you have a fairly good grasp of this kind of pattern, like I think for homework, if you go through this exercise, it will all make a lot more sense. That is going to be a really good sign. If you feel, you don't have to feel 100% comfortable, but if you feel somewhat comfortable with creating components, you're managing the state and all that, that is a really good sign. Okay, cool. Hopefully that was not too crazy, not too confusing. My hope is that, it'll all come together a lot more when you're doing it on your own. But this was a very basic overview of how that all kind of ties together. Okay, so let's talk about homework. So homework, I want you to do this on your own. Preferably your weather app's going to be better than mine. It should probably accept location as an input. So you probably maybe don't want to use the Open Media API, or maybe you have to use another API to take the latitude and longitude, transform that to a location, and then send that or sorry, take the location, transform that into latitude and longitude, and then use that data for OpenMedia. I'll leave it up to you how you want to implement it, but just try to improve the UX from today. My UX is not that good. And then, yeah, it should render a list of locations and their weather, kind of similar to what we have today. And I'm going to push this on GitHub as like a solution file, and try to do this exercise without looking at the solution. But, the solution is going to be in the Discord linked if you do want to reference it and kind of compare. The other thing I want you to do, if you have time, is to finish up the React module in the Playground app. So the second half of the React module, I believe, consists of like lifecycle methods, like we have context, we have refs, we have some other stuff. So just go ahead and just kind of review that material. Nothing too crazy, but just go through the overview. I think it even ends with a quick overview of React Native if you do want to play around with that on your own. Because, especially if you're comfortable with state and all that and events, you can start to apply those same concepts in React Native if you ever want to, make your own mobile app. That's kind of fun. So yeah, that's basically the homework. And looking ahead, so Tuesday, we're going to have one more class before the break. And this one's I'm really excited about. And we're actually going to change up our schedule a little bit. I know in the syllabus, it says we're doing Node first. But if I remember something from Bootcamp, and actually a lot of people, my friends that went to Bootcamp can say the same thing, going from React to Node was one of the most difficult transitions, especially just learning Node is like at the point at almost every Bootcamp student I know wanted to drop out at that section because it was just such a big shift. We've been in the front end world, right? We've been in the front end world for like 6-7 weeks now. And with the introduction of Node, it's like all of a sudden you're in this brand new ecosystem, right? You're in the back end, you're in the server. It's like very weird. So it's very jarring from my experience to make that jump. So that's why I think with Next.js, Next.js is actually a way for us to bridge React. So that's where we are now with Node a lot better. And Next.js is great because it just removes a lot of the complexities and it lets us just focus on building things, which is honestly the skill that's actually important, right? So next Tuesday, we're actually going to start talking about Next.js, my all-time favorite framework. If you've joined us before, you know how much I love Next.js. I use it for all my projects. I use it for the Playground app. You'll forever hear me sing the praise of Next.js. So you guys know I love Next.js. So that's gonna be really fun. And after that, it's gonna be a good time for us to take a little break for the holidays. And we're gonna be back on January the 3rd, 2023. And we're going to start off with a review session. So we're going to, just to make sure, I know taking a break from coding for like 1.5 weeks can be a long time. So I'm hoping by starting off with the review session, we can kind of get everything in order, make sure we didn't forget anything over the break, and then we'll dive right back into back end. So that's what's looking ahead. Really quick question in the chat. Is this a rerun? No, this is actually the first time I'm running this bootcamp. So this is not a rerun. This is like you're watching it live as it comes. All right, y'all. So that is it for today. Today was a little longer, but we do still have some time for just general Q&A. I'm gonna go through the chat, just make sure I didn't miss any questions. But do let me know, what you thought of today's session. Was it too fast, too slow? Like how did it feel? Do you want to get y'all's feedback on that? But if nothing else, I'll probably just wrap it up soon, just because, yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to cover. I think the date on the slide is wrong. That is probably true. Wait, did I put a date? Wait, oh, you're right. I said November 20th. Good call. It is not November. It is December. I was wondering why you said it was a rerun, but that makes a lot of sense. Let me go ahead and change that now. Thank you for catching that. I think my brain still thinks it's November. Let me go ahead and change that right now. There we go. That's a little better. Thanks for the call. Yeah, for sure. Thanks for joining. Yeah, I'm looking for the Next.js session too. You guys know me. I'm like Next.js, the number one fanboy. Yeah, for sure. So Tuesday, we're going to be doing Next.js. And so this is a slight change in the syllabus. If you guys remember, I think in the syllabus we originally had React, right? That's what we're on now. Then we had Node, and then we had Next.js. But I thought about it more, just based on my own experience as a bootcamp student like 8 years ago and teaching at boot camps. I just think Next.js is a really good bridge in between front end, which is the world where we're in now, and back end, which is where we're going to be, like as soon as we're back from break. So Tuesday before we go on break, we're gonna end with just doing a little bit of Next.js and just kind of showing you that world. And I like Next.js because it removes a lot of the complexities from React and Node. So it hopefully will make both of those a little bit more simpler, just so we can focus on actually building things. So we have in the chat, I'm interested in learning data science. Will this bootcamp take me there? No, unfortunately, this bootcamp is only dedicated to full stack software engineering. So all the technologies that we learn in this class are specifically designed to have you learn all the tools that will get you, that will make you the most hireable in 2023. And in my opinion, it's the best stack to build projects with. So even if you don't have the goal of becoming like getting a full stack developer job, like the Next.js, Tailwind, all that, the stack that we're learning in this class is a really great stack for building projects or building companies or whatever you want. So that's like the main outcome of this class. In the future, we do have plans to potentially run something like a data science program, but we don't have anything set in stone yet. So do keep an eye on that because we might announce them in the future. But for now, this class is just focused on web development. That being said, we do touch a little bit of data science, not like true data science, but when we start to do more projects, so in January, basically, we're going to be building like AI projects. And these are not true AI projects. We're not going to be training our models. We're basically just going to build projects that hook up to AI APIs like GPT-3. Like, we'll build a project like a writing app or something that hooks up with GPT-3. Maybe we'll build like a image generation app that hooks up with like Stable Diffusion or something. So these are just APIs, right? Other people have trained these models, but it's fun to like use web development to like build apps on top of them. So that is the limited interaction we have with data science in this class. But yeah, I am getting a lot more interest for like a dedicated data science program. So might start to plan for that a little more out in the new year, but nothing finalized yet. Yeah, I mean, if I were to teach data science, I personally feel like I have to catch up and review a little bit. I've been in software engineering for about like 8-9 years, and I've only been in data science for like 4 years. So sometimes I feel like imposter syndrome. Like I don't feel like I'm the most qualified to teach data science, at least not all of it. So I still need to brush up my own understanding first, make sure I am qualified to teach it. But yeah, now I'm getting a lot more requests to introduce that. So we'll definitely consider it. But in the meantime, until we have that program, this is, Kaggle is like the place where I send anybody who's interested in data science, just because their courses section, this is like fairly new. Their courses section is fantastic. It's all free. They like basically take you from the very basics of like, even though you don't know programming, they like get you started with that. They teach you Python. They teach you all the packages you need to do data science. It's really great. I would check out Kaggle. I used to recommend DataCamp, but honestly, DataCamp has changed a lot over the years. I'm not a huge fan of them anymore. I think it's gotten a little bit too expensive, and I don't find the material that engaging. I think Kaggle's a lot better, especially since it's free. So check out Kaggle if you want to get a head start in data science. It could be a good place to look. But yeah, there honestly needs to be more platforms that teach data science. There's really not that many between Kaggle and DataCamp that I can recommend. All right, maybe just a few more minutes for Q&A. Trying to think if there's anything else that I missed. Oh yeah, I do need to push up my code to GitHub. Guess you guys can watch me do that while we wrap up the Q&A. So this is React Weather, a weather app demo for the Twitch coding bootcamp. Public, yes. Create repository. Have you heard of Learn with Leon? I actually just ran into his bootcamp like a few days ago. I just like learned of his bootcamp. And it's what he's doing is fantastic. How does my bootcamp differ from his? I think the stack that we've chosen to teach is a little different. He's a great instructor. I honestly highly recommend his channel. I was really blown away by his curriculum, and I honestly didn't know about his Twitch bootcamp before I started mine. But his bootcamp is definitely a lot more people in it. It's very big, and I think the stack he chooses it reminds me more of like the same stack that a lot of older bootcamps choose, which it's a tried and true curriculum. Like I think he teaches like Mern stack. Yeah, maybe not. Man, I forgot what like if it's exactly Mern, but I believe he teaches like he goes more in depth into things like Mongo and stuff like that. The stack I've chosen is very, I don't want to say more modern. I don't think that's fair to say, but I've chosen technologies that I feel like a lot of bootcamps haven't taught yet. Like Next.js, I don't think bootcamps really teach Next.js. Tailwind, I don't think bootcamps teach that as well. TypeScript, maybe bootcamps teach TypeScript. I still have not yet seen that in bootcamps yet. But those three technologies are kind of the main differences of what my curriculum introduces. And in my opinion, just like those three technologies make you actually help you learn faster in certain ways. And in my opinion, especially TypeScript, I think learning that in particular makes you a lot more hireable, because back in the day, back when I went to bootcamp like 8-9 years ago, you didn't really need to have TypeScript. Actually, TypeScript wasn't really a thing. Like nobody really wrote TypeScript. It was like CoffeeScript was back then. But now I see a lot of serious software engineering roles starting to require TypeScript. And I just feel like if you're going to teach a bootcamp to leave out TypeScript in 2022, 2023, I don't know. I feel like it's got to be introduced at some point. So that's probably like the main difference. We have slightly different choices like technologies, but yeah, highly recommend anybody here if you want to check out his bootcamp as well. I can link it. I'm trying to find the link, but he has a lot of YouTube videos. Yeah, this one, 100 devs. Yeah, just linked in the chat. But yeah, it seems like he was a bootcamp instructor as well, which is pretty cool. All right. Anywho, back to connecting the repo. So get init, get remote add origin, get branch, and then get push. Oops. Unable to access. Wait a second. First commit, get push. What? No. Did I make this private? No, it says public. It says unable to push. What the heck? Let me see what's going on here. Oh, what am I using for terminal autocomplete? Yeah, it's this new startup that it's like fairly new. It's like fig.io is what it's called. Yes, this one, the next generation command line. So it has a pretty nice autocompletion. Honestly, I don't get that much value out of it. The main thing is for git commands. Like it's just for writing like git branches. Like some of my branch names are really long, and it's just a pain to have to rewrite it every single time. And Fig just autocompletes it for me. That's honestly the most value I get. So I'm using Fig. I have checked out Warp though. Warp.dev, right? I think is it. I haven't played around with that much. Yeah, I guess like Warp is like a whole terminal replacement. It seems like Fig is just like. Fig is an add-on onto your existing terminal. So if you download Fig, like it'll work in like regular terminal, it'll work in Hyper, it'll work in the VS Code terminal, etc. Warp seems to be like a competitor like Hyper, for example. But it seems like it looks like their autocomplete is pretty good too. I probably need to check it out again. I think last time I looked at Warp was like several months ago, and it seems that they've improved a lot since then. But yeah, I like how it's built in Rust. It's probably super fast. You should use source tree. I use the Git terminal only if there's a problem. I can't find it in the UI. Yeah, let me check that out. Source tree, you say? Free Git UI. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, it's like a visual representation of your Git. Yeah. Actually, I need this. I'm gonna download this right after. Check it out. Thanks for the suggestion. All right. Let's see if I can push now. What? Denied. Permission denied. What's going on? All right, it's okay. I'll debug it. I forgot some step in my Git Git workflow, but no worries. Yeah, why is it saying permission denied? I probably need a developer token, but I probably can't do that on stream. I'll do that. I'll do that on my other browser window. That's weird. I thought I didn't need a developer token if it's a public repository, but whatever. All right, it's all good. I'll do it. I'll do it after the fact. I also have to upload the videos from Tuesday as well, so keep an eye out for that. All right, y'all. I'm probably gonna start winding down for today. I think we got a lot done. Yeah, as always, if you need to review the slides, just go ahead and type in the slides command in the chat, like that. And then, there's also the YouTube command if you want to get the link to the YouTube channel. But besides that, yeah, that's basically all I have for y'all today. Thank you guys so much for joining. It's really great to see all the new folks in here as well. Welcome. And just looking ahead, yeah, so Tuesday, December 20th, we have, our last session before the break. It's going to be on Next.js. That's going to be a good place for us to stop. And then we'll be back on January 3rd with a quick recap. But yeah, as always, have a great evening. If it's evening for y'all. If not, have a great day. But yeah, I will see you guys Tuesday. Have a really great weekend, everyone. All right, take care, y'all. Yeah, bye everyone. Have a good weekend.